if somebody comes in and literally takes one little piece of this and goes signs a client using the information, they could make way more than 10x in just 1 month, right? And so that's the sort of person who, when they come in there and they see the information that we have, I mean, you could literally make your money back in a day if you want to, just by like signing one client or raising your prices by seeing, like if you want to make 100K and you're charging $25 an hour, based on data now, I can tell you, you're going to have a very, very hard time, most likely impossible to get there. So if you see that and you walk in, you're like, okay, I see what people charge per hour to get to this amount, and you make that change that day, you make your money back, right? So yeah, that's why like I really want action takers, because that's what that information is there for.
Hello and welcome to yet another fun episode of the Lewis and Kyle Show. In this conversation, Mitko Karshovski returns for his second appearance on the podcast. Mitko just released a freelancer case study through his company, Parable. He describes it as like HBR, which is Harvard Business Review, but for freelancers and solopreneurs. And in the early stages of this conversation, he'll kind of explain what and why that comparison is accurate, and you can be the judge if you agree with it. This conversation discusses his lessons from interviewing hundreds of freelancers to compile this case study. We discuss why he pivoted his business model away from an online course type community to this info product model. And Mitko is the remote work guy. So of course we get into his up-to-date thoughts on remote work, travel, and what he thinks that's going to look like in terms of the next 5 to 15 years. That's all I have to say before we get started. Enjoy. Mitko, welcome back for part 2 of the Lewis and Kyle Show. Glad to have you here for a second conversation today.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm stoked to be back on here again.
Yeah, I want to get right into a question I have for you, as most podcasts start. This is a question we fielded from a friend of mine who listened to the show, listened to your episode, when it came out like roughly a year ago, and said, I really liked your episode with Mitko, blah, 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 what I learned from it. So I texted him this morning and said, hey, we're talking to Mitko again today. Where should we start? Do you have any ideas? Like, what do you want to get into? And one of his questions, super relevant for me, because I'm moving to a new city in about 4 weeks, is, and you've moved a lot, what do you do, like step 1, day 1, week 1, to plug yourself into a new city? Like friend group, getting comfortable, some of those, like, I don't want to say hack, but does communicate the idea.
So funny enough, I have a Twitter thread all on this. So I'm going to pull it up right now just to make sure that I don't miss anything. But one of the first things
I told my friend he's lazy and should have just read
No. Don't say that. That's not what I was saying. But yeah, so
he's like the least lazy person I know.
So I kind of have 7 things that I like to do the moment that I get to a certain place, as soon as possible, right? So the first one for me is to figure out your immediate surroundings. So I like to make a radius of about like a mile that I walk within the first week. And when I'm doing that, I have my Google Maps open and I'm marking anything of interest, right? So, oh, this is an interesting coffee shop. It looks cool. This is a good grocery store. Oh, is this a gym? Let me double check online what it looks like, that sort of thing. So I'm just kind of like marking and getting the lay of the land so I know like what's around me. The other thing that I always do, and this is a relatively new thing, but it's just one of the things that, like, as I'm getting older, you kind of have to come to terms with, which is I find the nearest / best hospital in the area. And the reason why I do that is because now that I've been traveling for such a long time, the longer that you're on the road, the higher the likelihood that eventually something is going to happen when you're on the road and you're going to have to go to a hospital, right? And I had this happen to me where my wife got a really bad cut on our finger. And in the moment, I was like, I'm not sure if this needs stitches. Like, it might. And I was like fumbling with my phone trying to find a hospital in the moment as my wife is like bleeding on the floor. And I was like, this is stupid. Like, this is not planned out well. So for, like, you don't want to be looking for a hospital when you're having an emergency. So I just do a little bit of research, or have a VA do some research of like what is the best hospital closest by, and just have that as part of like your SOP if something goes wrong. This doesn't apply so much for if you just move to a new place, but if I'm getting an Airbnb, like for me, like, I move every 3 to 4 months, I'll spend $100 the first week to improve the Airbnb. Whether that means, getting, a new pillow, or buying some plants for the apartment, or just some of these things that, like, I'll oftentimes upgrade the coffee machine. So that's one of them. I will oftentimes spend an entire day or two checking out all the coffee shops that I found on that original walk. Because I don't know if you guys relate with this, but in my opinion, there's nothing worse than walking into a coffee shop ready to crank out some work and asking, sorry, do you guys have Wi-Fi? And they're like, no, we want people to talk to each other. Or you get on the Wi-Fi and it's like a speed from 1997, right? And so I would just hit a whole bunch of coffee shops in 1 or 2 days and mark like my top 3 favorites that I know for certain are like kind of like good ones and favorite ones. And then this is kind of, I think, the ultimate hack, okay? Host a party. If you just move into a new city, host a party and invite people, whoever you know around, and tell them like, hey, bring some people with you that you think are interesting. And that immediately creates a community for you. You get to meet a whole bunch of people right away. And you immediately become a connector because you're the host, right? You're the person who put it together. So it kind of puts you as like the connecting node of that community. And there's a really great book that I recently read on this. I don't know if you guys know who Nick Gray is. He's like pretty popular on Twitter. He's
I also just read the book.
Oh, did you?
Enough. It was recommended in a newsletter I read, and then I read it because it was like a 2-hour read or 2-hour cocktail party.
Yep.
But the book coincidentally took me 2 hours to read.
That's awesome.
Maybe by design.
Yeah. So do you agree with that? Like what he lays out, I think is such an amazing way to, you get there, you find somebody to host a party, or you host it, and then you're like the connection for that community.
So did you do the name tags at your party? So the book's called The 2-Hour Cocktail Party. It's like a recipe. It's like overly detailed for people who've like never done anything. If you've like never like talked to another person, this book could still get you to throw like a successful party. It is like hilariously detailed. I've thrown a lot of parties, but I still like learn things from it. But he's like, open the door, put cups out. It's like, yeah, you got to put cups out. But this is for somebody who's like had zero hosting experience to feel confident. Still a good read though. But did you do the name tags?
So I haven't done the party yet. This is the funny thing is, is I am planning on doing it in September when I have a little bit of time and I'm standing still. And I have a friend who I've already discussed with is going to host the party. But the other funny part is I was talking with Nick and I was like, hey man, I want you to come on the podcast because this is a killer idea for nomads, right? Who are, you know, like exactly what we're talking about, like to establish a community. And he said, I'm going to come on the podcast after you throw the party because I think it's going to be a much better podcast. And so I was like, deal. So now I have an incentive to do the party. I can't, you know, run away from it. And yeah, so then I can have Nick on the podcast. But I think just in general, I've done similar things, right? Like where like we've done a party or some sort of event when we've gone to a city, and every single time I do it, I'm like, we should do more of this. And so now that there's like a framework that I can follow, I'm very excited for it.
Well, don't skip the name tags in September. But
it's a must, right?
Well, I think
you throw the party,
really...
and if you did no name tags, he's just gonna cut your interview right there. Like, do it again.
Yeah.
That'll be his first question.
3 minutes in, yeah.
But I mean, I think that those pieces of advice work for people that aren't nomadic too. It's like, you know, people don't know what's in their neighborhood, and if you take a mile radius and walk around, like I learned that when I did cross country in freshman year of high school, is like I would run around this community that I had been in my entire life and find things that I had never seen before, and all of a sudden I knew new routes through like the neighborhood, new things. And I think that anybody can benefit from, you know, a mile walk around their city and hosting a party and knowing where the best hospital is. I think that those are really good tips just for anyone.
Yeah, I mean, my friend Dan Andrews, he travels with a bicycle, which is crazy. But it's his thing. Like he packs the bicycle, he flies with it to Thailand or Spain or wherever he's going. And he says the same thing, actually, Kyle, as you about like running. Like he's like, I love riding my bike around these places because sometimes when you're passing by in a car or an Uber, you're going so fast that you don't notice these things, right? He doesn't want to run, but when he's biking, it's fun. It's something that he does every day. And he's like, oh, that's interesting. You know, I hadn't noticed that before. It gives you a bit more time to spot those places. So, yeah, I totally agree with you.
Is that the tropical MBA guy? Just to try to like, is that him?
Yep.
Okay. That's very cool.
Mitko, the last time that we talked, you were, I think we talked on like a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and you're getting married on Friday. Is that right?
Yeah, it was a Tuesday.
Okay.
Yeah.
So So how did the wedding go, and how has your life changed since that big event?
Wedding went great. Thank you for asking. It was mid-COVID, so it was a small wedding, but it was like exactly what we wanted. It was super fun in an area of Kentucky called Red River Gorge, which is kind of like a little pocket of California in the Midwest. It's bizarre. If you've never been there, it's awesome. I highly recommend it. But it went really well. It was a lot of fun. And in terms of like how life has changed, it's both changed a lot in that there's a separate level of responsibility that you have now to your partner, but at the same way it's like not changed at all, because like my wife and I have been together for 8 years, right? Like we've been married for 2, but we're coming on to 9 years. So we were dating for 7 years before we got married. So like we were living together, we were traveling together. So like really in the day-to-day stuff, like nothing's really changed that much. But like, you have to go through and like, I don't know, like add your, spouse to your bank accounts and like do all these like boring things that kind of like make you feel like, oh, this is like really official now. Do you know what I mean? So in that way it's changed, but I don't know, on the day-to-day, not so much. I think just because we've been together for such a long time.
That's exciting that it's going well, though. It's very like, well, I'm a married man. I've been watching a show with my dad called Married with Children. It's phenomenal.
Is it the old
it's
sitcom?
from like the 90s.
Yeah. With what's the guy's name? It's something Bundy, isn't it?
Ed O'Neill.
Yeah.
Well, Ed O'Neill's the actor, and then he's Al Bundy. And
right.
He does not have positive things to say about his marriage. That's been like my nightly, just one episode, get some chuckles in, fall right to sleep.
Yeah.
Highly recommend.
That's
also
a
just
Schitt's
like
Creek for us
interesting
recently.
Okay, nice. It's very much like that actually fits well into my point here. Actually, that's like the Overton window. It's like if you want to define the Overton window for someone, just be like, okay, watch that show and then watch an episode of Schitt's Creek.
What's the Overton window?
Changing norms over time. Well, watch an episode of. Just kidding, but the Overton window describes more or less like what is socially acceptable to talk about, like what jokes are within the boundaries of funny versus offensive. Like what was funny then is considered offensive now. What is like weird and fringe now, or what is like, just the opposite in the opposite direction. And just like the humor on that show would be extremely racy and like, whoa. And to call it like, what's the term? Scandalous or whatever, like it would cause outrage if like someone just released that today, like outrage.
I mean,
but
we say that a lot about The Office. Do you know what I mean? Like my wife and I both love The Office, and it's like half the episodes would get canceled if they were released today.
Yes. Yeah, which is funny because like the guy this is like a total derail here, but Ed O'Neill's like Modern Family, which is like, I guess like a pretty in vogue current show. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm out of my depth here. I'm watching like one sitcom from the 90s and acting like I know anything about TV. But that is our riff on married life, unless we bring it back up. I'm going to transition away from this area. I've exhausted my degree of ability to say things that make sense on, and ask you about the pivot that you did at Parable from kind of an interactive, synchronous in many circumstances, live kind of community, educational group, etc., to more of a Harvard Business School type business model. Tell us about like what was the motivation for that decision, maybe a little context on what things were before, because I kind of maybe butchered the explanation, and what you switched to, where you got the idea to switch, and then we'll get into like the product and the lessons, etc.
Yeah. So the reason why I initially started Parable was because I'm a nerd, right? Like the thing that I enjoy the most is talking to like other business owners and just talking about like how's business going and like how are you doing this and how are you doing that. And I know that other people are also interested in that, and that there's a lot of value in those conversations, right? Like there's a reason why there's so many business podcasts, because everybody wants to figure out like, okay, how are you doing this and how are you doing that, and et cetera, et cetera. So I started Parable because I wanted to explore more of that. I wanted to scratch my own itch, but I also wanted to do it publicly, within a closed group for people who wanted to participate, so that others can also see how different businesses are doing that. So the way that we started doing it was that it was a community and people could pay to get in, and then we would release case studies with different businesses. And the case studies were essentially like, kind of like PDFs, but then also along with it, there was a video interview with the founder. And we wanted to do a whole bunch of different ones, right? So we did like a SaaS business over here and like a podcasting business and, whatever. There was a bunch of different ones, an agency, whatever it may be. But what I found was that people were kind of like, I noticed that people were interacting with the case studies that were most relevant to their business or the business they wanted to start, right? They were like, they had kind of like blinders on, like, oh, this person owns an agency. I want to learn more about that. But then it was a bunch of different businesses. They just didn't really care so much about them. And so that was starting to become really difficult, right? I was almost feeling like I was like trying to force people into interacting and being a part of the community when all they wanted to do was figure out more about their business, like learn, different strategies to help them with their business, ways to grow it, how to get new clients or customers, et cetera, et cetera. And so because of that, I was like, okay, like let's pause here. Let's rethink how we do this. How can we lean into what our customers are showing us with their actions instead of trying to force them to do something else? And the way that we pivoted was to go deeper, not wider, right? Like, okay, let's let you go down the rabbit hole. Like how much more information, how much deeper can we go into each one of these different businesses? And there's actually a lot of, precedent for this. Like Harvard Business Review has been doing this for, I don't know, decades, right? They go and they look at a business and they go really, really deep into that business so that other people who have similar businesses can learn from that, right? And so that's what we pivoted into. And what we're doing now is releasing what we're calling case study reports of different types of businesses. And so that allows us to kind of really go in deep on all these different business models and allow people who are interested in those models to get a lot out of those case studies.
Yeah, I think one line that was on your sales page that I really liked was, and this sticks out in memory to me. I've done like one or two HBS case studies in school that we had to write reports on, whatever, was like the Porsche Cayenne launch, right? That's like the classic one that we had to do, was like, you're Porsche and you only ever sold sedan or sports cars, but let's launch an SUV and like whatever. And it's what you said is like, my customers, like, you're here because you want to be an online entrepreneur. You want to be like somewhat location independent. You probably want to create digital products. You probably don't have $1 billion of budget. You probably don't have a 50-person engineering team. Like, that's useful theoretically for like a middle-level manager, project manager to consider. But it's like, we're just not mid-level managers at billion-dollar companies. And to be fair to Harvard Business School, that is what a lot of people go there to do. So that is a pretty good product to offer their people. But you're like, we're not that. We're free, like, into the specific one you're talking about is like freelancers. So I like that line a lot. How did you pick that as your first one to get into? And then let's also get into like some of the process for building this product and assembling the report.
Yeah. So the way that what I say is like, and I'm assuming this is the line that you're referring to, is instead of focusing on these $1 billion companies that you kind of can't relate to as an online business owner, what we focus on is like small businesses that you can actually learn from, right? It's like the business that you actually want to build so that you read this thing and you immediately know how to apply these lessons to your own business. And the reason why we focus on freelancers was, it was kind of like we looked at it from like two different points of view, where it was like, we're testing this, right? It's a pivot. We need to like essentially do an MVP of this. Who do we know most of? Like, who do I have the most contacts of that we can get this done the quickest, that I think is going to be the easiest? The second point would be, what type of business owners do I have in my audience, that I have a lot of in my audience? And the third point that I kind of thought of was a mixture of like, I think a lot of the lessons for freelancers would be valuable for other businesses as well, right? Like, even if you're an agency, you can take a lot of those lessons and use them as well. But then also for me, freelancing is a sort of base level business skills. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean it as like, most people should start there. So if you're new to online business, if you're just getting started, I think a lot of people try to like jump to these sexy businesses, like build a SaaS or have an agency or, e-commerce or whatever, instead of them starting at like the first level and going up a bit more slowly. And I recommend people do that instead of trying to jump to like the fourth, fifth step. And so that's kind of the other reason why we did it, was in terms of, if we're serving a wider audience of online business owners, let's get the base, set. Like, let's start there. And so that's kind of how I thought through starting off with freelancing.
Yeah, and once you deliver to that group of people who are the ones that are going to go on to start those sexier agencies, et cetera, you can serve them as they grow as well, which is a really good strategy. One of my questions is like, the HBS cases that I've done, at the end of it, it's like an open-ended question that you're supposed to, come up with an answer, and then you sort of compare what you've done to what happened in reality. Is there like an action that the students that buy these reports are required to take? Like, you take in this information, produce, what you would do, and then compare it to what actually happened? Or is it just like, a report on the business and the decisions and why they made them?
Yeah, so we tried doing something like that in the community, and it just didn't quite hit as well as I thought it would. I thought that it would do really well, but it just didn't. And that's a lot easier to do in a community setting as well, right? Is like, I would have to have some sort of like further on connection in order to like really judge that in the way that we're selling it now. So at the moment, there isn't anything specifically like that. However, what we put together, and it wasn't part of the plan originally, but when we started building this out in the 2 months that we built it, we decided to add it in, is essentially a trends database. And so what we did was we built out a database with a whole bunch of information in it, right? So it's like, how many years did it take them to get to $100,000, right? Are they using marketplaces, or are they charging by hour? Like, it was like a whole bunch of these different like data points. And when you put them out into a database, what I noticed was that you can almost kind of match them up and form trends around that. And so the reason why I think that this sort of answers the original idea that you were talking about there with HBS is that it's very easy for you to then insert yourself as the next, sort of person in that database and say, what am I trying to get to? And what do people who've already gotten there do differently than me? You know what I mean? Like, you can almost like fit yourself in there and say, oh, that's really weird that, 90% of the people that have hit 100K charge their clients in this way, and I'm not doing that. Maybe that's something I should do, because statistically speaking, it's what people are doing to get to this point, right? And so I think in that way, it makes it very actionable, where you can like slot yourself in there and say, what are these people doing that I'm not, that I need to put in place right now?
Yeah, I think people have their, right, they open your report and they already have their assumptions about how long freelancing will take them to get to whatever point they have in their minds. And, shatters your assumptions for most people who aren't like too narcissistic to be like, okay, if there are 100 people studied here, I'm likely to be somewhere between the worst and the best, right? In general, just like how you generally view yourself at most things. And then you can see the people you most relate to, right? Well, like, I don't know, men versus women, U.S. citizens versus international people, writers versus coders, et cetera. And kind of people like who are just starting out versus people who had like a pretty impressive career and decided to quit and then start offering a service. And you kind of, again, can rank yourself and judge yourself just like people do at the gym or any other kind of competitive activity. And then that is like kind of what you're saying, Kyle, is like their assumption is like, well, I would fall here. And then it's like, well, realistically, you're going to fall more. Like, you give people some accuracy and set some expectations. But I think kind of like a subsequent question, or adjacent version of Kyle's question, I interviewed someone without Kyle a few days ago, a friend of mine named Jackson, and he is like studies happiness. He's a lecturer about happiness and does like corporate trainings on mindfulness and those kinds of things. And he teaches, his big thing is like very much like the James Clear, because he doesn't want to be in like his differentiator, right? He doesn't just want to be another person that's like, get sunlight, like do whatever. He's all about like the behavior change and all about like the, I'm useless to you if none of your lives are changed by this long term. So like his whole thing is like happiness habits, curriculum, and implementation. So I guess that's kind of like another version of Kyle's question. It's like, what have you built into the product to really hold people's hands, or build systems or guardrails to help people like really take action, not just like binge through your content one night and then be like, that was cool. I'm just not going to do anything though. Like, how do you try to guide people into taking action with your information?
Yeah. So two-part answer. The first one is, that when you like, we try to make things very, very clear. I think inaction comes from confusion. So when you make things very, very clear and you know in almost bite-sized chunks what is the next thing that you need to do, it makes things less scary to take action. So by making the information that we present so granular that you can almost break it down in that way of, okay, comparing myself to these people, what is the next small step that I need to take to get here? I also think realistically looking at these things and knowing how long things take and pacing yourself is very helpful, right? Like there's so many people, you guys have probably seen this on the online space, like, all right, how to make $200,000 in the next 6 months. Like that's bullshit. No one does that. And if they do, they got lucky, right? So my friends at the Tropical MBA that we talked about earlier, they have this great rule called the 1,000-day rule, right? Which essentially means that on average is going to take you,
it's a great article.
It's killer.
And
it's killer
article.
Because it's true. Like on average, going to take you about 3 years for you to feel, like you can rely on your business. And lo and behold, what does our data show? It took people about 40% of people, it took them 3 years to get to $100,000, right? It was the number one most cited year that it took them, the amount of time that it took them to hit that goal. So that's the first thing, right? Is like really breaking this down so that you understand where you lie and like kind of what the next steps are granularly. The other part of it is that I want people who are coming into this to already be action takers. One of the things that I found from, running a business and working with a lot of clients in the past is that is a very, very, very hard thing to coach people into, is taking an action. It's almost like a mindset thing and a muscle that you have to have built. So I'm not so much trying to coach people into that. I want people who are coming here and buying this to look at this information and be action takers already, right? And so that goes a lot into the messaging and goes a lot into the way that we're selling it and who I'm selling it to. So if you're just getting started and you're not somebody who is going to take action right away and be a self-starter, then I think there's a lot of things that you need to figure out first and build up to before you buy a case study like this, right?
Yeah, it's not like a couch to 5K product if you're familiar with that kind of phenomenon. Yeah, I think, one kind of this is another assumption a lot of people have. It comes back to finishing books. You'd probably be happier, right? Someone buys your product for whatever the price is, finds something interesting, right? Immediately goes out and closes a client for 2x the price of the book or the PDF or the product, and then never returns to your book. It's that's more of a win for you and for that person than the person who spends it, reads the whole thing, and doesn't change. So it's almost just read this. There's going to be, there's a lot you might already know. There's a lot you definitely won't already know. If you find the one thing, immediately use it and then never look back. That's a win for everyone.
I just read Tiago Forte's Building a Second Brain book. I read 4 chapters. And I put something in place and I haven't picked up the book since, right? I didn't finish it. And there was when I was, I don't know, as I've gotten older, I have less guilt about this, but especially when I was younger, I thought, oh, there you go. Oh, you got the hard copy. You're fancy. I have the Kindle version. But it's I don't really feel guilty for not finishing books anymore because the book is $10 and I already got $1,000 worth out of it, right? Just by reading the first 4 chapters. And if I ever need a refresher or feel finishing it, I'll go back to it. And it's the same way with our case studies. The report is $297, right? That's what it sells for right now. We're going to very likely raise the price. But if somebody comes in and literally takes one little piece of this and goes signs a client using the information, they could make way more than 10x in just 1 month, right? And so that's the sort of person who, when they come in there and they see the information that we have, you could literally make your money back in a day if you want to, just by signing one client or raising your prices by seeing, if you want to make 100K and you're charging $25 an hour, based on data now, I can tell you, you're going to have a very, very hard time, most likely impossible to get there. So if you see that and you walk in, you're okay, I see what people charge per hour to get to this amount, and you make that change that day, you make your money back, right? So yeah, that's why I really want action takers, because that's what that information is there for.
Yeah, it kind of comes back to, this is probably something in your book, right? Freelancers always talk about, if your client who's it's a $50 project and they're I think I'm going to need to get to know you. I need to know your favorite color. Let's hang out for now. Let's get a beer. Let's play around a golf. And they're is there any way you could do $45 instead of 50? And then you have your clients who are just they've been on the phone. They're I like your vibes. You seem like a good guy. How much is it? $3,000. Okay. What's your you got Venmo work? And you're sure, I guess Venmo
Yeah,
works.
that's like
all
a
right, cool.
mind. It's
Just
like a
those clients that are
the
using
thing
this.
with there is it's almost this takes a little bit of time, I think, to figure out. But it's if you as a client, right? When someone charges you a lot of money, you walk into that relationship saying, if they're charging me this much money, it's because they're good, right? Like think about going to buy wine and you're at the store and you see an $11 bottle of wine and you see a $150 bottle of wine. If you don't know anything about wine, which one do you think is better, right? The one that's $150, right? Because there's a reason why it's $150. And when most clients hire a professional to do something, they're hiring them because they're looking for an expert to do that thing, right? So it's like going to buy wine without knowing wine. And so when you're looking at two different freelancers or service providers, and one is $25 an hour and the other one is $250 an hour, you're going to assume the $250 one knows way more. They're an expert. So you don't need to babysit them. So when they say, hey, this project is going to cost $3,500, you're like, great, I have no problem paying you that because I know you're a badass, right? If you're $25 an hour, I walk into a relationship thinking something isn't right here. I need to watch them. Something's going to go wrong at some point. So I do need to make sure I know them to make sure they're not crap, right? So that's the reason why that happens. So I always tell people like shoot high, man. Like if you want less of a headache, definitely charge more.
What are some additional, maybe there's a way for me to ask the question more interesting that when like, what's an additional tip from the PDF? But what's something I think, your background, you've done a lot of freelancing in your past, you've done copywriting, you've done a lot of e-commerce work. What are some things that, you learned from assembling it about freelancing as a business
So
model?
there was a whole bunch of, it's interesting because there's a lot of things that I assumed or like I thought were correct that were now proven correct, right? That I have data around. So that's been really fun because there were some things and on the flip side too, like there were some things that I assumed were going to be correct that actually didn't seem to be represented in the data. So now for us, it's very fun to say like, did we ask the questions not in the best way? Like, is there a way for us to dig in deeper on this to see if we did something, if there was like a better way for us to mine that data, right? So obviously one of the big ones was where people get their clients. That was very interesting that I assumed I knew and was proven very, very correct. 93% of clients, 93% of freelancers that have $100,000 a year have the exact same client acquisition strategy. 93%, okay? And if you're...
What is it?
Can you guess?
Google Ads.
Cold?
Organic.
Referral. Oh, wait, I saw
Referrals.
your tweet.
93% of freelancers who make over $100,000 a year cite referrals as their number one acquisition strategy. Now, there's about, I would say, 30% of those, 30 to 40% of those do use something else in addition to that, right? So there's some who are like, I have a website that I have really good What do you mean?
Cold start problem, right? You don't have referrals if you're starting from zero. You don't have referrals. You don't have existing clients to
exactly.
Create new.
I mean, it's interesting because I think, especially with the ones who have an additional thing, they have almost like a power up. Like someone has a really popular website, or someone has a very good Twitter account where they're able to get essentially people coming in from Twitter, right? So it's like. But all of them had referrals in common, and then some of them had something in addition that really helped them peak. And then those were the people that were doing like $200,000, $300,000 a year as a freelancer, or the ones who had something in addition to that, right? They had a personal brand of some sort, whether that would be through SEO or through social media. So that was an interesting one. The one that this is the one that we kind of were proven correct on was having a focused niche and communicating it in your pitch, right? So like I do copywriting for direct to consumer e-commerce brands, right? So that's one that I thought would have a much higher correlation with a high income and a high revenue. And it didn't actually, it was so-so. Like there were some people who weren't and still did really well, but then there were some people who were very much on point and proved that we thought that that would be valuable. I think this is one of the things that when we do the version 2 is something that we're going to look into a little bit further and ask the questions a little bit more differently. But that's one of those where if you're doing everything correct, right, when you compare yourself to all these other freelancers and you're like, I'm doing everything these people are doing, but I'm not hitting the same results that they are, that's the one that I would hit, right? It's like, that's the one that I'd have to adjust, that I'd have to change if I wasn't doing that already. And in terms of the V2, because I brought that up, like one of the things that I'm really excited about this is I was trying to decide, like, do we do this as like a lifetime thing? So is it like you buy it once and you get access to it forever, or are we going to sell each version differently? And we decided to do it as a lifetime because what that means is next month we can update it, right? So when I'm getting more freelancers in right now, so that means that we can update it, and it just continuously gets better and better and better. And I'm already getting people that are coming in saying like, hey, it would be really awesome if it had this, right? So one of the next things that we're going to be introducing very, very soon is actually templates, right? So I said referrals. We might be introducing a template to actually help you systematize getting referrals, right? To actually make a way of you doing that instead of like, we'll just ask for referrals. So that's when I say V2, that's what I mean by that.
Yeah, it's exciting. What, from your understanding and, I guess, collection of information, is the lowest time to highest income freelancing niche in 2022?
Can you explain what you mean by niche?
There's photographers, but there's like baby photographers, there's, wedding photographers. There's all these different ways that you can be a freelancer.
Yeah, okay.
So skill plus niche.
Like the lowest time to the highest income that you've seen?
So this was not our strongest suit for this initial version, because most of the people that we got was a split between copywriters and marketing professionals. So marketing professionals is defined as like, some people doing SEO, some people doing like some mixture of like SEO and copywriting. So they were kind of a bit different. I had harder time getting in touch with developers. They're a bit more standoffish about like what I'm doing. And I'm hoping that's something that now that we have it released and they can see what it looks like, they're going to be more friendly towards. So it's definitely something that we're working on for the next version, is to actually get a more diversified group of freelancers to study. I will tell you that just within the copywriting field, right, for people who identified as copywriters, it went from $50,000 a year, which is actually in order for you to be in the case study, you had to have been freelancing for at least 3 years and make at least $50,000 a year, because then that gave us enough data to work with, right? And as a side note, the number of people who have been freelancing for like a year and make 50 grand from the start was shocking. That was the one that I don't have hard numbers on, but I walked away doing this research saying like, wow, there's a lot more people doing 50, 60K in 1.5 years than I was expecting. So that was very surprising. I think that has a bit more to do with that businesses are a lot more friendly towards freelancing now post-COVID, because they're way more comfortable with remote work. That was one of the things that we found as well, is a lot of our freelancers saying like, it's a lot easier for me to get clients now because, they don't care that I'm in California and they're in New York or whatever it may be. So anyways, I will tell you that the big gap was even within the copywriting, as like, hey, I'm a copywriter. We had people who had been freelancing for about the same time, do $50,000 all the way up to $350,000 a year, all as a quote unquote copywriter.
And was the difference for them the niche, like you hinted at earlier? If they're like a niche copywriter versus just a copywriter? The difference there is in that specific scenario, it's personal brand. So the really high earners, they tend to have a personal brand. They have a big social media following. They're well known as a copywriter. They're a bit more of a leader in the field, right? So they're not just a copywriter. There's nothing wrong with being just a copywriter, but they're a copywriter and a thought leader in copywriting, right? They're a leader in the they're seen as the copywriter for copywriters, right? Like they're in that field, so they can charge way higher rates. Well, I'm just thinking about, I don't know if each of us has a different person coming to mind, but for me, it's like immediately thinking of Cole Schaefer from Honey Copy as like one of those copywriters who's got like a really solid email list. It's really funny. His LinkedIn posts pop off. His Instagram goes pretty viral all the time too, because he just writes like interesting poetry, and like he has an aesthetic, and he's just got a brand. He's got an identity. There's more to him than just like, I need someone who can write, pretty words. It's like that's who he has that. I'm thinking of someone, right? And then it's the word I would say is non-commoditized, right? If they're a person with attributes, they're just non-commoditized, versus I go on Upwork and I'm like, I need a copywriter, versus I want this person with these characteristics and this vibe and this trusted.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Upwork one is an
interesting
thing to bring up, because it was one that I was very curious to learn more about. And we did find most of the high earning freelancers do not use a marketplace like Upwork. We had a whole bunch that they could choose from. The most popular was Upwork, which, when I say the most popular with an asterisk, because not that many people said they use marketplaces. If it's the most, I am going to assume it's the most popular, but that's the one that I'm actually going to push back against. Like, me, from like a business standpoint, I view it as, I would almost say, what I mean by push back is, I would say, looking at the data, it doesn't mean don't use Upwork, because I love these marketplaces as a marketing channel. I think when done right, they're viewed as a marketing channel, whether it's like social media, SEO, referrals, advertising, partnerships, marketplaces, right? It's one of, not the only. I think when done right, you have a profile on all of them. And if a client comes through there, then hell yeah, awesome. And if they don't, then that's fine. There's no reason not to have a profile on there, and then just increase your prices to assume the percentage that they take. And if someone comes through, great. If they don't, then they don't. But data, based on data, a very small percentage of the high earning freelancers, meaning 100K plus, were using marketplaces.
I want to switch now to the more of your personal thought leadership, right? The future of work, the remote work infrastructure. You kind of hinted at the probably even pretty dramatically, since we had done our first episode, just dramatically increased social acceptance of a remote freelancer, like a zero in-person relationship between you and someone you are trusted to pay and create a deliverable. What are some other kind of recent changes you think will staying power? What's kind of like your vision for the next, 2 to 5 years of, because at least, let's call it optimistically, things look pretty firmly over as far as like
in terms
the
of like
necessity
COVID,
of remote work, in the same way it was necessary before. So it's like, what now that it is exactly now that it is truly optional, in the sense of like there's not a government saying you can't congregate. What do you see as like lasting changes over the next 2 to 5 years? And then if you want to get really creative and share like crazy longer term
I think
visions.
the trend that we're going to see over the next 2 to 5 years is that remote work is like the cat's out of the bag, right? Like we're beyond the return point. The interesting thing is, remote work is really the first domino, right? So when you start talking about like 10, 20, 30 years in the future, remote work is the first domino of a much longer, domino line, so to say. So there's a lot of things that, like, if you just like think from like a logic standpoint, they're going to happen because of this event. The interesting thing that I think is going to be dominant in the news over the next 2 to 5 years is companies trying to retain some form of like control, or let's do things the way we used to do them, by forcing the hybrid, workforce, right? Like you can work from home like Monday, Friday, but Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, come into the office, which, by the way, did you know there's an acronym for this? I just found out about this. It's called a twat worker. So if you work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, because it's Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, right? It's TWAT. They call it a twat worker, which I was like, okay, get a better acronym, but hilarious either way. So I don't know if you need to bleep that out. I don't know if that's that bad of a word. Yeah. There you go.
You're just spelling words for us, man.
But I thought that was
just putting letters
from,
in
like,
an order
Business
and saying what the
Insider or
sound
something
is.
like that. It wasn't some like weirdo on the internet. Right. So it's
Bro, everyone's a meme dealer.
the thing with hybrid work is it's gonna fail. So companies are bringing in hybrid. A lot of these companies are hybrid first. The issue is that in the long term, they're either going to go remote or they're going to go office first, and either's fine. That's my thing. Is like if you're like, hey, I want to work in the office, and all of your employees are like, great, I'm all with you. I also enjoy working in the office as well. Awesome. But you're either one or you're the other. Because if we play it out, here's what happens, right? If you're hybrid, that means that you're not putting in place the infrastructure and the processes that you need in order to function efficiently remotely, right? So you're going to overly rely on your days in the office, right? You're going to be kind of getting work done. You're going to be kind of efficient when you're remote. And then on your 1 day, 2 days, 3 days in the office, you're going to over optimize to get like the things done or get things in place in order to people kind of be doing their job when they're remote. And just by doing that, even doing 1 day a week of that, you're going to start to lean towards the office. Like the office days are going to be the ones that you're getting the most work done. They're going to be the most efficient ones. So you're going to slowly push into, becoming all office, right? The other thing with hybrid work is that just doing 1 day a week or 1 day every 2 weeks or whatever it may be of required office work, you actually kill a lot of the benefits of being remote, right? So that includes hiring the best people no matter where they are from the world. That includes reducing your costs and increasing your profit margin because you no longer have to pay for an office or snacks or the energy, electricity that it takes to run an office. So you're immediately cutting a lot of the benefits, but taking on some of the negatives, right, that may come along with remote work, which of course there are some negatives and downsides. So because of that, I think if you get caught in that place where you're in the middle, you're gonna lose out in that way because you're not adopting the remote work strategies and getting those benefits, but you're also not like, I think what's gonna happen, and I've compared this, I've said this a few times publicly, where I think there's gonna be an industry or a niche, I don't know what you want to call it, of companies that are like, hey, we get things done in the office and it's part of our company culture. And when we sell products and services, we sell them as office companies, right? The same way that people love buying Amish furniture because it's handmade and they're okay with paying a premium for that. They're voting for their dollars. There's going to be people out there that are like, I hate this remote work thing, so I only work with companies who work in the office, right? And that's great. If that's how you get clients and you're okay with them, that's awesome, right? But I think in the next 2 to 5 years, we're going to see a lot of companies trying to have their cake and eat it too and do this hybrid thing and try to please their employees by giving them some ounce of remote, and it's going to backfire. And we're going to end up having either a fully remote first company or companies that are like, no, that's not for us. We're going to stay in the office.
Yeah, I think one beneficial hybrid way of doing it is the like remote days. So rather not like a Monday through Friday, just remote budget. So kind of like you have your vacation time, then you have your remote time, and then you have your XYZ. Because I think one of the big benefits of remote work, right, is like you can take more vacations that are half vacations, which for things like visiting your parents, right, you don't need to visit your parents and also be like on vacation, like visiting your parents and let's say they're in some non-interesting city. It's like you're not really there on vacation. So like you don't want to burn your vacation days. You're just gonna like eat dinner together, go to like your favorite restaurants together. But like for the most part, they're just gonna watch daytime television and you're just gonna work. And so it's like you have your, maybe like a 20-day remote allocation, your 2 weeks vacation, and then work versus being like the Monday, Friday thing. Cause I think you're right about a lot of those benefits. So I think like that's a pretty good, I still think like the cat's out of the bag in terms of like people have this expectation for some of those increased amounts of flexibility and like half vacation, half work stuff. But definitely some of like, again, in general, that like why cliches are a thing, right?
So
when you're trying to have your cake and eat it too, you're just gonna get.
I think the way to think about it is: are you remote first or are you office first? Right? You can't be hybrid first. That's what I'm trying to say. So it's okay if you function hybrid from time to time, like exactly what you're explaining. Like, hey, if you're going home or you need to take like whatever. Yeah, like work hybrid in terms that like you're working remotely, but normally you're in the office, but your operating system needs to be one of the two, right? Hybrid first is an operating system.
From a company-wide standpoint.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, one point that you
What was my
that you
question?
brought up there
Go
that's
for it,
really
Kyle.
important is like, if you operate as a office first company or as a remote first company, you're building systems and processes that match that. And if you are an office first company, like masquerading as a remote first company, you're going to lose out,
Mm-hmm.
and vice versa, on the benefits of being either one of those things by like trying to be this like middle of the road guy just to try and make everybody happy. It's like,
Yeah, because the
makes a lot of sense to
underlying
me.
mechanic there is that if you have one fully remote employee, in order for them to be as efficient and productive as possible, all of your processes need to be remote first friendly, right? Because if you're not doing your procedures the
Mhm.
right way, if you're not documenting meetings, if you're not doing all of these little things in a remote friendly way, then that person that's working remotely for you will not get their job done in the best way that they can get it done, because they're going to have insufficient data, right? And so that's what I mean is, if you even have I think even if you're Lewis, like you're describing, like even if you have these moments of some hybrid work, you need to be either okay as a company knowing that you're not going to be as efficient during those periods, or your underlying procedures and systems need to be remote friendly, right? Because otherwise, like you're how are you going to do your project management, right? Like, unless everyone has a remote friendly way of doing that.
This is a very Kyle question to ask, but how do the cities change? So we talked about like work and companies, but like how does travel change? How do cities change? How does like the map and physical space change?
Yeah.
In your vision for the future? Kyle's always with the real estate questions. Like, do we just see a couple more, hot spots spring up? So I think like that the like kind of 10 years ago, right? Like the trying to have your cake and eat it too was trying to demand an in-person workforce in a really random location, right? Like you're not going to convince a software developer to move anywhere but San Francisco, LA, or New York City, or you're just not going to hire the best software engineer. I think that's only going to get more exaggerated over time. So like if you're truly an in-person first company,
Yeah.
you're going to have to be in like a city that people are
Well, that's
willing to
just
move.
always been true. I mean,
But
the part of it that is changing is that there are remote employees,
yeah.
and there's a disconnect between where you work and where you live. And so, like, I mean, I'll let Mitko answer the question, but I have my own opinions about how, the world looks well, first of all, we just don't know what a world looks like where work and like where you live are disconnected. And that is unfolding in front of us. And Mitko, I think, is one of the people that are, on that forefront, writing about it and thinking about it a lot.
Yeah, I think Mitko thinks more globally than you and I as well.
So there's
I'm thinking like very
and I mean, I think it's a super
US
fun
here.
conversation. So Kyle, I'm very excited to kind of hear what you think about it. But one of the immediate, like almost things that we're experiencing right now, like in the moment, there's three things that are happening right now that are very interesting in this sphere. The first one is the donut effect, right? So this is happening right now exactly because of the hybrid work that's becoming very popular at the moment, where you're getting a donut effect in terms of you're having a lot of people moving as far away as possible from their HQ, but that they can still come in once a week. Right. So you get this donut effect where people are like, hey, you know what? Like, I'm okay living an hour away from New York because like once a week I'm going to take the train and I'm going to suffer through it as long as I can get the lower cost of living and like maybe like bigger space that I get for living an hour away from New York. Right. That's not something that would have been okay if you did it every single day, for example. So you're getting this sort of donut effect. That's the immediate effect of the hybrid workforce. And that's kind of the long-term issue of not doing remote first, because you're not unlocking that opportunity to be global as opposed to still kept, centralized in some way. You're not decentralizing opportunity. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that you're getting a lot of city to city competition. And we've already seen this in terms of, Miami really trying to compete with San Francisco in terms of tech talent. I think that you can make the argument that like Austin is the new LA in terms of a lot of like the entertainment industry is going there. There's also a lot of tech talent going to Austin. That's, I'm not saying that's not true. So you're getting a lot of these cities almost like businesses competing with each other in the marketplace of talent, right? And this is something that we even saw all the way back in 2017. I think Cleveland did, they kind of very forward thinking came out and said, hey, we're not Cleveland anymore, we're Blockland. And we want to be the home for crypto businesses in the Midwest, right? So that was almost this idea that they had even way back then. On top of that, looking, zooming in a bit more and now talking about big cities, we have small towns right now realizing it's a huge opportunity for them to attract high earning professionals who can work remotely from wherever the hell they are, right? So we have platforms like Make My Move right now, which you can go and visit. It's makemymove.com, where you can go and it's a marketplace where towns can list the offers they have for remote workers to come move to their town. That's incredible. Do you know how much power that gives employees and just the individual to be able to say like, well, Youngstown, Ohio is offering me way more than Springfield, Illinois, so I'm going to go there. And here's all the programs they have, and here are all the things they're planning to let me do in the community, and so on and so forth. So I think that that's super, super exciting, and that's something that, we can play out in terms of like, oh, what does that do to government and, our politics, for example, locally here in the United States, in terms of, oh, you're getting this not so distinctive mix of red and blue, you're getting a little bit of this purple, right? And I think that's very, very interesting. So there's that. And I think the other thing, in terms of talking a bit more globally, what's happening is, and I think this was Balaji kind of, explained it in this way. So kind of like a little hat tip to him, but the world is becoming more longitudinal and not so much latitudinal. So with longitudinal, I don't know how to say that. So what I mean by that is horizontal. There you go. Yeah, that's a better way of saying it. So what's interesting now is you have a lot of these companies
vertical,
that are saying,
horizontal.
hey, you can work from anywhere as long as you're in this time zone, right? So we have WFH, which is like work from home. We have WFA, which is like work from anywhere. And I like to call this WFEST. You can work from anywhere as long as you're in the Eastern time zone or you play friendly with that. So what's very interesting now is that you have this horizontal shift, right? Where people are going US, Europe, right? But now what you're seeing is a lot of this US to Central and Latin America move, because you can shift down and get a lot of that geo arbitrage, but still stay friendly with these companies and have a lot more work potential. So I think that's very interesting in terms of shifts now, where people are thinking, okay, great, if this company, or maybe not even company, maybe I'm working with a client right now and it's a very demanding project that's short term, and so I need to be on their time zone. Do I go stay in Germany, or do I go, somewhere south, somewhere in Africa? I think Africa has a lot of potential right now for remote work. They're very quickly updating their infrastructure. And so I think that that's a very, very interesting thing to keep an eye on over the next 10 years.
Kind of the China Belt and Road Initiative or whatever. I don't know anything about that.
The Belt and Road, yeah.
China
throw it in
investing.
there, and it's, we're ready for an Economist title.
To throw in there.
Article.
We're going to get picked up by The Economist for this interview now, because I mentioned something geopolitical.
Oh,
Kyle's got a vision, though.
Yeah, I was going to say I wish I was smarter in terms of like being like Balaji and being able to make a bunch of geopolitical connections and like really give a convincing point for a certain worldview. I mean, I think simply people are disconnected, their work and the place where they live no longer have to be connected. And that is something that we have never had before in the thousands of years that humans have been around. And the implications of that are many. I don't know all of them, but it's like, I don't know. I don't have to drive to work. There's carbon emissions there. I have to pay for gas. So now I have more money. I'm a saver now. It's like there's economic, there's social, there's so many things to it. And, my mind goes to like real estate and apartment complexes. And the only reason that apartment complexes are where they're at or are good investments is because of the location. And those locations serve because they are close or, transport hubs, right? And if you take that out of the equation as being important, you give people a lot more optionality, and thus it changes the value of being in any certain location. And so the value of that real estate is now theoretically diminished, which changes a lot about like the way municipalities work, because most of the revenue that municipalities in America make, obviously it's contiguous, United States point. I'm American, I've been here, so it's clouded. But like the reason that we have schools that are better than other schools is because real estate values are higher, which collect more real estate taxes, and real estate taxes fund the municipalities. And so if, there's this big shift in real estate values, you have this like spreading of, I guess, quality of services between larger cities, smaller cities, tertiary markets. And I think it'll be really interesting to watch, but I don't know how quickly that'll happen. I think, Mitko, one question I have for you is like, how has your perspective on the trajectory of this change kind of changed since COVID to now and like through COVID? Because there was a moment there where people were like, people are going to work from home forever. This is like the offices are dead. And now we see more people taking on this hybrid model or this office first approach. And so kind of like, where do you see the trajectory?
So,
and how it's changed.
To add on to, what you guys what we're talking about before in terms of, okay, this is like what we can expect over the next 5 years, 10 years, but what is like the big picture? I think the next 50 years are going to see the rise of the city state. The same way that we're seeing now cities compete with each other. And, Kyle, this is following up to what you were talking about. I think we're going to have far more granular competition between cities. And you're going to see, I think, especially once you tie in crypto to taxes way more. So as a nomad, right? Like I'd love to be able to contribute and pay for the local infrastructure that I'm using. So I think like all cities are going to have their own coin that when you go to that city and you visit it, you purchase some amount of it. And then you go to the park, you scan your phone and you pay a little bit towards the support of that thing. So I think in that way, you're going to see way more cities competing with each other. And it's going to become more of like a city focused thing, not so much as a nation. Because for example, as a digital nomad right now, I go to Thailand because of Chiang Mai. I don't go to Chiang Mai because of Thailand. In some regard. So it's city first, you know what I mean? Because of the community that's there. So I think that's very interesting. In terms of how my perspective has changed, man, I've become more bullish than ever. I always thought remote was the future. Yeah, I mean, I've always thought remote was the future, just based on like there was this like calculus that I was like, I just don't see how this doesn't happen in some respect, right? Like if I believe that we are, and this might sound a little bit, I don't know, like crazy for some people, but like if I believe that humanity is destined to be a multiplanetary species, then you have to factor remote work into that. Do you know what I mean? Like if we're going to have an economy that's between Earth, Moon, and Mars, just like a starting point, we're going to have like the basic infrastructure of working asynchronously, right? Like if we're going to have a functioning economy in that context, then we must have asynchronous infrastructure built into the way that we work. It's just as simple as that. Otherwise, it's not going to work, right? And so that's why even back in 2016, 2017, I was saying, it might take 50 years, it might take 60 years, but I'm pretty sure remote work is the future. And COVID just took that 50, 80, however many year timeline and just shrank it to, 10, 20 years. So I've become more bullish than ever. I think the office is dead, at least the way in which we see it. I'm not saying that you're not going to come together or work together in some way. I think co-working spaces are going to be more popular than ever. But the office and the way that we viewed it in the 20th century and the start of the 21st century is dead. And so I've become more bullish than ever, and I'm more than happy to verbally fight with anyone about that and to, explore that idea.
Hell yeah, I love that. I have 3 random comments and then one more question, and then I think we'll wrap it up. First one about the donut city. This is just, I don't know why I held on to this, but on the donut model, right? Like I'm just berating the donut model for some of its silliness. It does make a lot of sense. But you're not going to get, like if you throw a cocktail party, not a cocktail party, like a happy hour on like a non-in-person day, no one's going to go. So like that's a huge benefit of like the in-person in the same city. Like none of those ancillary social activities people are going to participate in the donut model. That's just a random point. I just didn't let it go for some reason. Second point, with all these predictions, I have a prediction I wanted to add to the mix.
The Amish are always
I
going
think
to kill
that
it, man.
30 years from now, 50 years from now, the Amish, they're going to keep on keeping on. You know what I mean? So like the communities that are they're just going to keep on keeping on. So good for them. It's kind of like, and the broader point is like these small pockets of communities now, because Kyle kind of made that point of like, you know, property values in some area are going to go down and then maybe people stay. I think like kind of what you're saying, just like these very insular communities that like their way of life are going to kind of create that kind of lock-in, because to keep that way of life, they have to prevent people from leaving. So kind of like the Amish did that in the way that they did that. And so maybe we'll also see that in like, I don't know, like a high-end neighborhood of Chicago that still wants to have the best pub schools. So maybe like that neighborhood won't be as remote friendly or something for their workforce. I don't know. And then, or like they'll continue to try to import talent and then kind of seduce them to stay there. And then the third point, just about like why I think remote work's inevitable, is that like in agreement with you, it's just about like the general phenomenon of unbundling of just things over time, right? Just like that's like the general trend of technology and of like abundance and of social progress and like technological progress. Is just you no longer need things as the whole. We just like continue to make the individual component like desystematize things. So like work used to be the system that represented, like Kyle said, like the bundle. Work was like where you go, what you do. It was those things together. Like work was just that. But now it's like you redefine work to like what the component parts are. Like now work does not mean where you go. Work really just means like what you produce, like what your output is. So like this is kind of that trend over time. So now it's like, now we've kind of, work no longer was this combination of factors. It is just like we're getting deeper and deeper to what the essence of a thing is, and the essence of the thing of work.
Yeah,
is
I
now
mean,
like
I think you're so spot on with that.
and it's no
Like,
longer
I don't know if
tied
you've
to
ever heard of
the
the
majority
Coase
for
theorem
the
before.
location.
Yeah,
that's like
yeah. So
wait, I do.
COA. I'm gonna.
But it's like
COASE. I
COASE,
think his
right?
name was Robert Coase who
spell
came
it?
up with it, but
Yeah.
I might be wrong on that. But essentially, the idea behind that. There is, but there's also like, I don't understand the calculus part of it,
It's some
but
calculus
the
stuff. It's like a
overall
calculus thing, isn't
idea
it?
is
I
that
don't know.
the size of the business is like a company wants to stay as small as possible, but expands when it's easier to bring someone in and take up, that complexity of expanding versus working with outside talent. So what technology is doing is it's making it really easy to, exactly like you're saying, to unbundle the company, right? Because it's so easy now to work with freelancers, and going back to why I think freelancing is so important at this stage of online business and the economy and work, is that we're going to see a lot of this, exactly like you said, unbundling of the company, where you can have one or two people who are like, great, we can get a majority of things done with outsourcing and automation. And then from time to time, we need to bring in like an expert or two who come in, get their job done, and then leave. And we just continue rolling on. And so I think that the unbundling comment is just so important in understanding the future of the economy and of work.
Yeah. My final question for you. So I think one answer to this question is exactly what you're doing. But what business opportunities lie in capitalizing on all of these humongous changes? So I think one of them, right, is like making it easier to start businesses that benefit from these changes by providing information, which is what you're doing. But maybe it's co-working spaces. Just like, what are one or two kind of areas you see? Maybe it's Airbnb hosting. Like, what are the other? I mean, because you only have so many hours in the day. I'm sure there's 10 other things you'd be loving to do, but you're only going for what you're going for because of limitations of time. What else?
Great question.
Is being behind it,
and you're spot on the
opportunity
money,
because of what's
happening.
happening.
I'm a big fan of, don't go digging for gold, but like sell the picks and shovels. And everyone is so focused on Web3, which I think is great. Like I totally understand that, and I think that there's a lot of opportunity there. But there's almost this very interesting thing happening where everyone is so gung-ho about Web3 being the future and like working in that space, that there's not as many people paying attention to like the work from anywhere infrastructure. And that's going to be just as huge, right? As all of work goes remote, someone has to build the infrastructure, the tools that you need, all of these different things that you need in order to make that function. And so I think if you are like, okay, if I believe that a majority of work in the future is going to be done remotely, and based on that assumption, what are the things that need to be improved in an infrastructure, and go and tackle those leverage points? Like, that's massive, right? So when we start talking about, exactly like you said, co-working spaces, co-living spaces, I think are going to be huge as people are traveling around and they don't have a long-term rental and they want to still interact with people. I think that's going to be huge. Talk about like traveling with families, right? How do you teach your kids if you're moving around more often? I think housing as a service is going to be a huge thing where you pay kind of like a monthly fee and you have a whole bunch of different places that you can stay in. I think there's a lot of this stuff that that's going to be very, very interesting and that people are going to be focusing in. So I would say that if you just think about like in terms of opportunities, if I believe that the future of work is mostly remote, what are the things that need to be built out to support that? And I think there's a ton of opportunities there.
I think that's a great question for people to think on at the end of this conversation. Just to direct people selfishly for a moment, I think you follow him as well on Twitter, like Matt Redler. I think that from Panther, that's like a great example, right? If we're hiring people from everywhere and people are working from everywhere, for the time being, we still have like a pretty archaic global legal structure where to hire people, you need to like fill out paperwork and then submit it to an office somewhere in a random country. It's like you need to hire someone in Spain, you need someone on the ground to fill out this paperwork and put it in an office and like let his company handle all that craziness for you. So that's like a good example just to give people some additional thing, like remote insurance, remote health insurance for another example, remote payroll compliance. So just thinking through all those things, maybe we'll give the people some more ideas. But I think that is all the time we have today at Mitko. Where can people find your podcast, your social media, if that's still important to people, social media?
You can connect with me on Twitter. I'm at Mitko, Mitkoka. I'm very active on Twitter these days. I'm really loving it there. So come on over there, say hi, shoot me a DM. I'd love to connect. You can listen to the podcast. Just Google That Remote Life Podcast. You'll find it. I also have a newsletter called Remote Insider that goes out every single Monday, and it's actually very popular. So, or at least gets really high ratings from the subscribers. And then finally, if you're interested in freelancing, if you're a freelancer yourself and you want to kind of improve, or you're interested in getting into it, just head on over to joinparable.com and you can get it right there.
That closes out this conversation with Mitko. 3 quick takeaways, then we'll sign off. First one is I like his pivot from the Parable original model of the online synchronous community with guest speakers and just all these difficult things to coordinate. Everyone, across time zones has to be interested in the same things and show up at the same time. And there's just a lot of coordination that has to go in, and it's kind of not the best for anybody. Whereas this is a hyper specific product that's good for a select group of people, and the people who it does serve are better served by it. So good job, Mitko. I think that was listen to the data, made a good pivot. Second takeaway, I like how he describes his target customer for this new product. It's $300 for PDF. Some people might think that's crazy. Some people might think that that's a scam. But for the type of person who might want to buy this, what Mitko would describe as an action taker, if they're already a freelancer, if they're thinking about freelancing, and they apply one idea, right? Increase their rate from $25 an hour to $35 an hour, or increase your prices in this way, or consider this marketing channel you didn't consider before, and you land a $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 project, it's pretty clear that that money was well spent. So I like the action takers framing and the possibility for an immediate ROI. Third takeaway is kind of just the new internet paradigm of how you can make products better over time. So I kind of describe it as a PDF, but it's really just access to this online resource that will continue to change over time. So I don't know if this was on air or off air, but I asked Mitko, it sounds like this product isn't as good for a freelance engineer as it is for, let's say, a freelance copywriter. You're going to, release 2 separately. What are your thoughts? And he's like, well, I can continuously update it. And as it gets better, I can send the people who already bought it the better one. And I can send people, I can then more aggressively market the new and improved edition to that demographic that wasn't as well served by the first one. So I like that a lot. I think that, if it was just a book, he couldn't do that. And that's a really cool option to consider. Like, you can release something imperfect for all people, in the sense that it's imperfect for a developer, even if it's super good for a copywriter, and already kind of start to collect revenue and market it. And then as it gets better, you just improve the same product. That's obviously not a new business model for something like software, but kind of the continuously improved info product business model, I think, is really interesting. And there's definitely like some ideas I have based off of that I wasn't thinking about in the same way, because I was thinking like you release it and that's it. So that's all I have to say for this episode with Mitko. Make sure you are subscribed if you care to be among the first to know about the next episode. And otherwise, have a great day. That's all for me. See ya.